review, and then you had a list of things that you wanted to talk about.
Well, my list of things was mostly just humorous things that had happened to me in the last few weeks. Since I busted my knee, I've been playing a lot more Legacy because I can't destroy people playing basketball, so I choose to then channel my hate towards Eternal Magic. So I've been playing like twice a week, so I've had a number of humorous things that have happened to me. But yeah, mostly I thought now Conspiracy spoiled. We have a non-zero number of M15 cards, and Conspiracy has some Eternal cards in it. Some are probably on the fringe. Some maybe are vintage only. But we could probably sort of walk through the spoiler and talk about each of the cards. There's some wholly new mechanics that I think if you jump around on the message boards, you will find people just butchering the rulings, especially like Council's Judgment. It probably took 80% of the Magic populace like 9 to 10 readings of that card before they realized how it actually worked. So we could probably go over those mechanics. And yeah, M15 is a little light right now. There's a super squid that's been spoiled, but other than that,
There's an awesome elf in it.
yeah, there's an awesome elf and a super squid. Yeah, so maybe let's just. So I think probably the one to start the discussion off with is Council's Judgment. It's probably the one that's gotten the most internet rage on both sides of the coin. A lot of people think it doesn't work the way it works, but anyway, the wording for our audio-only podcast here is, well, it's a sorcery, white, white, one, will of the council, which is a new sort of keyword with reminder text. Starting with you, each player votes for a non-land permanent you don't control. Exile each permanent with the most votes or tied for the most votes. So breaking this card down, first of all, just talking about the new mechanic, vote is sort of a new game mechanic, I guess. I don't think there's anything that currently votes in.
No, I don't think so.
There's a couple things where it's other people choose, but there is not anything called voting.
Yeah, so voting, well, for you, the key things on this card. One is non-land permanent you don't control. So this is from the perspective of the caster, and I think a lot of people were getting confused when this card was initially spoiled that the "you" was referring to the voter or the each player. It's not. It's the "you don't control" is from the perspective of the caster, not from each player taking a vote. So you can't get your own stuff with it. So the other thing that's unique about this card, besides the voting thing, is that this all happens on resolution. This is kind of like like the Cabal Therapy situation. You simply cast it, and then everything else is going to happen on resolution. So if your opponent has an effect like bouncing their Batter Skull, using a Mother of Runes, which is actually kind of irrelevant here, using a Wirewood maybe to rescue an elf, they can do all that. Then this resolves, and this all happens at once, and no one has priority while you're voting and doing the exiling. So, and finally, the other really important thing is that this does not target. So for all of you people who have blood running down your thighs over True Name Nemesis, I guess this is your answer. As you, as the Council's Judgment caster, can choose your opponent's True Name Nemesis no matter what it is equipped with. And if this resolves, you will likely get to exile it. So sorcery speed, a little bit of a downer. 3 casting costs, a little bit of a downer. But it definitely has legs. So, what do you guys think of this?
Well, you said it was a sorcery. Well, I think it obviously has to be a sorcery. Giving an untargetable Vindicate that's 1 white white at instant speed.
Well, you can't hit
way too good.
lands, so let's get Vindicate out of the question, right? No lands.
Yeah, but I like it.
Great analysis. I guess, Matt, what do you? So you can start. I mean, what decks do you think this is an obvious fit for? If anything, do you think it?
Reasonably, I'm gonna say this is gonna either fit into Miracles as a one of, so they can deal with Liliana, or sometimes True Name Nemesis can be a pain, right? But also to Death and Taxes. Death and Taxes is gonna love this because sometimes they also have trouble with True Name Nemesis. So having access to nug your True Name Nemesis is pretty good. I mean, there are no other decks that really want this, I think. Anything that's splashing white. I know for junk, black, white, green, I don't want this. I have Liliana, I have Zealous Persecution. I don't need a 3-mana kill target True Name Nemesis. I have access to Maelstrom Pulse and Vindicate, and those are strictly better in a lot of other circumstances. So being able to get a Progenitus or True Nemesis is a pretty rare occurrence that I would specifically need Council's Judgment for.
I agree. I think most of the white decks that, aside from like Miracles, most of the white decks have something they'd rather be doing against a True Name Nemesis. And in the case of like a Stoneforge Mystic deck, a lot of the times that's just going to be bashing them with a Batter Skull or something like that.
Julian?
Yeah, so what I think, I believe we wouldn't even be talking that much about this card if it wasn't for True Name Nemesis. Because if you think back, it's, except for the non-target aspect, it's kind of like Vindicate and a bad version of Vindicate. And we hardly saw any play of Vindicate lately. Like it used to be like a one-off in some Esper Stoneblade lists, but overall it didn't really make a big showing in Legacy. So this card basically reads destroy target True Name Nemesis and sometimes Progenitors, because Elves is really popular these days. But even though the card is really good, as you mentioned, I think there are only 2 decks in the format. I can see playing it, and I don't even know if they really want it, because I feel Miracles isn't that concerned about True Name Nemesis. Death and Texas obviously is, but I still don't know. I mean, the other solution would be like to have a Ruined Halo, that's also like applicable against some combo decks. So, I mean, the card for what it does is good, but overall it's kind of niche, because what else would you really want to side it in against except for True Name Nemesis and maybe Progenitors? So, I don't know.
The other
I'm
card
torn.
that does a lot of what this does sans True Name was like O-Ring or Detention Spear, right? Just a versatile 3 casting cost, sorcery speed, white thing that deals with either an equip, a creature, a planeswalker, right? I mean,
Yeah, and Oblivion Ring is much better with Show and Tell.
Yeah, that's true.
exactly. Yeah.
That's one place I really see this coming in, is replacing the maybe one of O-Ring or Detention Sphere in a Miracles deck, because it can take care of like Liliana. Another point though is I think that in a deck like Miracles you can cut maybe one Terminus or one of your Supreme Verdicts, because a lot of the reason you're running like 5 sweepers is to get rid of True Name Nemesis. Now you can cut maybe 1 or 2 of these, and that will also strengthen up your 3 slot, which is a very very hard to fill up spot in that deck.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, how about a whole new deck? I mean, is there anything, it's versatile removal. Does this spawn a new deck? I mean, I wouldn't think so. Maybe Land Tax has been unbanned now for over 2 years, and it really hasn't gotten any legs underneath it. Some really heavy white deck. You mentioned Death and Taxes. I think this card plays poorly with, like, Thalia. So I don't know necessarily that a deck like that would consistently be able to find white too when they've got their Thalia out. So I don't
It
even
might
know.
be a 1 to 2 of, though.
Fair, yeah. I mean, I could see maybe a Maverick deck. Like I was watching some Star City streams, and a couple people were playing Maverick on stream and butchering it savagely. But in between misplays, I was noticing that a lot of those decks, obviously they have problems with a resolved True Name. I mean, a Maverick deck with their mana dorks could probably get white 1 pretty quickly. Maybe a deck like Maverick plays a couple of these and then throws a basic planes into their deck or whatever.
Yeah, but I think the general problem in Legacy is like tempo-wise, this card is awful. Can you imagine any other card in Legacy that's actually played a lot? That's 3 mana, sorcery speed, and just a 1/1, and always just gonna be a 1/1, unless you got a Mindslaver going, then you can actually 2/1 them, but I guess that doesn't really count.
That's going deep.
Yeah, but that's kind of the same problem with Vindicate. You don't really want to pay 3 mana and then just 1/1, and always 1/1 and at sorcery speed. That's like a pretty heavy commitment, and the general problem I see there.
Yeah.
So guys, does this become playable at white? Instant does what it does.
Ooh.
Yeah,
I don't know. All 3 colored is really rough though.
I think instant puts this card in a whole new category, definitely. But as is, I think it'll get play. We won't do any predictions here, but I think we all agree it'll see some play, but it probably won't.
Because can you imagine they're like, Jace, brainstorm, and you're like, wait, response, council's judgment, getcha.
And
Oh,
then you're
no.
still behind the card.
It's still okay.
Yeah, I'd rather
Yeah, but
flash in
then
the
you
Ocean
2-for-1
Peak at
yourself.
that point. Yeah.
Meh.
All right, moving on. So I think that was really it for the white cards. There's a man who poops spirits out, and there's a few other sort of.
Whoa, Squirrel Nest. Whoa, whoa.
Well, we're only doing new cards here. All right.
Okay.
But I don't think any of them are particularly eternal relevant. Moving on to blue. I think there's two cards here we could discuss. I think they'll both be pretty quick discussions. But the first one is Marchesa's Infiltrator, which is essentially, if you're old, like me, you'll remember Ophidian and Ophidian's dominant place in the blue creature department. This guy's a 2 and a blue, 1/1 dethrone, and that's a new mechanic, which is whenever it attacks the player with the most life trigger, put a +1/+1 counter on it, which is obviously sort of a declining. If you're attacking consistently and damaging your opponent, you would think they'd eventually have less life than you. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. It's a human rogue. So
my first thought for the card would be like, I would love to block the guy with the Deathrite Shaman when they tap out on the third turn to play this guy.
yeah, I think the most direct comparisons would be like, why would you ever play this over like a Cold-Eyed Selkie, let's say,
Or Edric.
or Edric? Yeah, I mean, I think you're only talking about some kind of shell in which you're playing Ancient Tombs and blue cards, and you're trying to literally power this guy out.
Oh, Dat Fairy Stompy. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I tune myself down to 18. I play my Chrome Mox and I cast this guy. Now I'm at 18, so my dethrone should probably trigger.
That's an interesting thought.
And then they play a Deathrite Shaman on their turn 1 that blocks and kills this.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, that's right, because it'll have triggered. That's right.
Yeah.
No, but it triggers when it deals damage, not when it attacks.
No,
the dethrone will trigger.
Oh, attacks. Ah, okay, not deals damage.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only
okay,
reason
so-
this is even in the discussion is the fact. I'm assuming you're going to find a way to make it a 2/2 when it first attacks. Otherwise, I think it's cat litter.
All right, so I know what we need to play this in. We need to play this with the best card in the entire Zendikar set, or the entire Zendikar block, not Jace the Mind Sculptor, Death's Shadow.
I thought you were mentioning Fetchlands now.
I would think it's some kind of a sea stompy shell. Maybe those decks tend to stall out. You don't unless you can get a Sophie online. You tend to drain your hand really quickly. They also I think this guy would pair well with any kind of bounce. Which that was the principle behind the old Ophidian decks or Shadow Mage decks. As you're drawing more bounce from the extra card draws, you're just bouncing all their blockers and ruining your opponent's turns as they try to slam their blockers back down. So,
Did somebody say Waterfront Bouncer?
yeah, waterfront bouncer. I guess if this was a Merfolk, this thing would be pretty. He'd still be worse than Cold-Eyed Selkie, I think 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, if it was a Merfolk, you would hardly ever trigger the dethrone.
Right. All right. Well, anybody have any strong thoughts on this, or does this look?
I think it's garbage.
On the fringes. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe in Vintage Humans, because that's a thing, but like you said, I don't know if you wouldn't just play Cold-Eyed Selkie, other than the fact that your Cavern can make this guy uncounterable.
Or Shadow Mage Infiltrator and have an actual invitational card in your deck. All right, moving on. The other card that's maybe worth mentioning here, and just because it's an interesting card to look at for purposes of comparison, is Plea for Power. Plea for Power is a 3 and a blue, so very little color mana requirements. Starting with you, each player votes for time or knowledge. If time gets more votes, Time Walk. If knowledge gets more votes, Ancestral. So 3 blue, unfortunately, sorcery. So I think the most direct comparison to this would be something like Concentrate, which sees no play, or maybe a card like Fact or Fiction, which is an instant.
Sees almost no play.
Sees almost no play, is an instant, and even skirts things that disallow draws. Any thoughts on this?
Well, I actually have a thought. A couple of friends and I were actually talking about the whole taking an extra turn and how many mana is that worth, because we know that 5 mana for 1 extra turn is totally fair. That's been done many times. So I'm surprised that they actually haven't pushed it to 4. Like, we know 2 is obviously too good, 3 is too good, unless you're flipping coins.
Right.
But 4, like, maybe would 4 have been too much? I don't know. I think personally, for design, I think I would have liked this card better if it's like, oh, if it's tied, you get the extra turn.
I don't know. 3 cards is a lot of cards.
I think I would actually rather draw 3 cards than take an extra turn.
I just want them to see pushing the extra turn to the limit.
I mean, there's there's a couple of reasons you want the turn more. One is you have creatures. Two is you have planeswalkers. Like that's or you're about to go nuts with something in Vintage. But assuming Legacy, I think the turn is better when you've got obviously creatures or
Planeswalkers.
planeswalkers. Yeah. Um, I guess when you're looking at something like Concentrate, which isn't played and will never be played, what holds Concentrate back? Is it just not good enough? Period. Is it the blue? Because if you're just going to get the 3 cards most of the time, is this better? Is this okay in something like a Tezzeret Stacks deck that has access to copious amounts of colorless mana? Even then, I would probably compare it to something like Tezzeret's Gambit, which doesn't see any play, can be cast for just 3, and can fiddle with chalices and tangle wires and things and draws you 2. Um, I don't know. I think it's fringe playable. I think if it was going to get played in anything, it would be in something like a Tezzeret Stacks deck where you've got Tombs and City of Traders and fast mana like Mox Diamond, and you'd have Planeswalkers out. So getting the Time Walk is actually really really good when you have Agent of Bolus out because
Yeah, but you're never gonna get the time walk then. It's like always the same
But
problem when you play one of these cards that give your opponents choices. You're always gonna end up with the worst choice for you.
but
And
let's be honest. How bad is it to just, oh man, I have to draw 3 cards? Oh no.
Yeah, but then you, like we were just saying, you could just play Concentrate, and people aren't playing that. So
or brainstorm.
yeah, I think your deck's got to have Chalice, got to have fast mana. I think, and even in a Tezzeret Agent of Bolus deck, which I've played a ton of since Baleful Strix was printed, the 4 mana for me is about the limit, and it's filled with Planeswalkers and like Smokestack and the Abyss and things that are just absolute nut shots. And this probably isn't that. Also worth noting, like some of those decks, or I prefer to have lots of permanents in those decks, and this is yet another thing that can.
And like a Stumpy Shell, this card is kind of flawed in the first place strategically because you're not gonna make use of your fast mana, and then you're just tapping out, drawing cards. Yeah, that's good, but then you allow your opponent to catch up because you spent 4 mana on not impacting the board, and the entire deck is kind of built around on using this advantage you get out of the soul lands. And this card, I don't know, I think there are enough cards, mostly planeswalkers, that impact the board and can provide card advantage that this won't see any play in any of these decks.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't impact the board, so you've drawn a bunch of cards, but most Stompy decks want to play a Chalice or a Trinisphere or some other locked piece. So, all right, I guess that's it for Plea for Power, huh?
So I also found this other really cool card, and if we look at it, it's 1 blue. It's called Stifle, and it counters an activated or triggered ability. Do you guys think this will see play in Legacy?
No, not at all, man. Who uses activated abilities?
Well, I think that card's really good with Phyrexian Dreadnought.
Oh man, I think we found a new combo, guys.
And you can stifle Standstill, right? Like
Yeah, you
that's a
can
good play.
stifle Standstill. Judge, can I stifle Standstill? Yes, you can.
That's my favorite thing about Stifle being in this set, because I've already seen it once, and our store didn't even get very many boxes to do drafts, was watching people not know how Stifle works. And it's, maybe it's a little bit of schadenfreude, but it's really funny to watch people try and, 1-mana counterspell something.
I got you, right? No, you don't.
I can't count the amount of times when my opponent tried to stifle Wirewood Symbiote. I mean, they can stifle it, it just won't do what they think it does.
I mean, people have stifled Standstill. I've seen all kinds of stupid shit. There's a reason that you shouldn't go play Magic with children at draft night.
Stifle the counterbalance trigger with a Sensei's Divining Top out.
All right, moving on to our red cards. Pickings are pretty thin here. There's a bunch of shitty goblins and shitty ogres and a big shitty mythic dragon.
Welcome to Red in the last years.
Yeah, there is one card that it's probably worth talking about, only because of the role of your life total being a factor on certain cards in the last couple of years. But he is the Treasonous Ogre. He is an ogre shaman for 3 in a red. He has Dethrone. He is a Hurloon Minotaur. He's 2/3. And I think the only relevant text, the text, if this guy ever gets broken, that will cause him to skyrocket in value, is pay 3 life, add red to your mana pool. So, interesting in that this guy is, I mean, one of the first guys that just comes down and lets you kill yourself.
Only if your life total is like an increment of
Yeah,
3.
increments of 3. other things of note, if you play this guy off of a Seething Song and something like a Belcher deck, assuming you've got 20 life, you can throw 18 through him and net yourself, what, 2, right?
6
Yeah.
mana.
No, but you could have had the season song like in the first place. So
Oh,
So yeah, he can net you 2 mana, and you can go to 2 is the other thing. And if everything goes wrong and they force your Belcher, you are left with a Hurloon Minotaur, I suppose.
and they play Delver and pass.
Yeah. Well, you can't
oh, it's
abruptly
actually
this
quite
guy.
interesting because it's got synergies with Dethrone.
It does.
You pay life just to grow it.
Yeah. So.
Oh man, this card is bad.
Yeah. So, any thoughts on this guy outside of Belcher, which obviously has so many mana spells now? I can't possibly see them, wanting this guy.
Well, I could see him comboing with Fireball.
This guy is pretty good against Stace.
Yeah, that's true. Combos with Death Shadow, but there are so many ways already to burn your life total down that I don't think you.
Oh,
want a
It'd be
4-mana
easier to
red
just
Mirror-
bolt yourself.
I've got it, guys. Mirror Universe. You get yourself down to 2, and then you just exchange life totals.
and then
And
cast
then they
shock.
stifle the mirror universe.
Oh,
All right, moving on. I was trying to find a red card that was even remotely playable in this set, and I failed.
if we look at Provoke from this set, it's a green card. It actually looks like the guy from Monsters Inc. Let it be.
I'll take the old Korean art over the new crappy one.
Aww.
All right, so moving into gold cards, there's a legend in this set. He's maybe worth talking about only because of the colors he's in. 2 white-blue legendary creature spirit, Brago King Eternal. He's flying, and when he deals combat damage to a player, exile any number of non-land permanents. Sorry, target. I guess that's important. Target non-land permanents you control, and then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So he's basically a 2/4 evasive guy, legend, that can flicker all of your stuff that isn't a land. And he's a spirit for what it's worth.
I think that's pretty cool. I mean, you need to have stuff with a lot of enter the battlefield triggers to really abuse it, but I think you could definitely build around it.
Yeah.
Well, you can also basically alpha strike and then untap all your dudes too, right? Even if they don't have enter the battlefield triggers.
You could also just
That's also
cast a
true.
Restoration Angel.
That's true, you could, but then you wouldn't be playing with this cool conspiracy guy.
I can't think of a compelling reason to play this guy. I mean,
EDH General?
yeah, so that's another podcast. If this guy was either fatter, well, I hate to say this too, or had hexproof, he just needs something to protect him. I mean, I guess he can't be bolted, he can't be abrupt decayed, but man, without either flash, hexproof, something,
Just
or
being bigger.
being bigger, yeah, it's a tough sell to play this guy over, I don't know, a Vendilion Click or just anything you can play and disrupt your opponent. I mean, if you have a bunch of Stoneforge Mystics and stuff that's going to be awesome when you flicker it, I don't know. I just get the feeling it's a classic case of you're probably winning anyway.
But how many times is flickering Stoneforge Mystic worth it? I mean, if it's in play, you've already searched once, so at most there's 2 more equipment in your library.
Yep.
It also detaches your equipment that's already attached.
Yeah, well, you can choose any number, so...
Oh, any number. Okay, I don't see the card right now. Yeah.
But, yeah, anyway. And being a legend and not having hexproof is probably more of a detriment in Legacy at this point anyway, because your opponent's crack is just bounces it. So, I don't know. I, unless anybody has some compelling reason to continue discussing this guy, I think we can move on.
I think we can move on to Pernicious Deed, which is really looks not too bad in the new frame old
Matt,
art.
stop talking about old cards in a new set.
Oh, but all the new cards suck, though.
Wait. They don't suck. I've got one for you. Dack Fayden.
Face of the
1
set.
blue, red. Planeswalker, Dack. 3 loyalty. So 3 loyalty on a 3-mana Planeswalker. We know that's a good starting point. +1. Target player draws 2 cards, then discards 2 cards. So a targeted Faithless Looting. -2. Gain control of target artifact. And it doesn't have the reminder text. You control this when Dack Fayden leaves the battlefield. So, but you do.
They're trusting us more and more.
Yeah, they're exactly. They're putting trust in eternal players. And his ultimate is a -6. It is you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell that targets 1 or more permanents, gain control of these permanents. So Dack Fayden. I'll start off with this card. This guy looks almost tailor-made for Vintage. His +1 is insane with Goblin Welder. It's also insane when, like me, you get your Blightsteel in your hand, 9 out of 10 opening draws. He's insane against other Blightsteels. I mean, they basically can't tinker for Blightsteel when this guy's in play, or if they do, when you untap and play this guy, his second ability leaves him around and you have a Blightsteel. It's also interesting to note that the +1 is targeted, which is a lot different than the other looting cards that we've had in the past, with the exception of like Cephalid Coliseum. Pretty much all those other effects are you. So if you have a card like Spirit of the Labyrinth or Chains of Mephistopheles out, he just says Mind Rot, target opponent.
Oh, I like the Chains of Mephistopheles combo.
Yeah, so I mean he's versatile. He can get to 4 loyalty and thus avoid being bolted. I think the -2 in a format like Legacy is just not that compelling. I mean, stealing equipment, I guess, is okay. Oftentimes the equipment's already done its work if you're having to deal with it at sorcery speed. Um,
It's also worth pointing out that when you steal equipment, it remains attached to the thing it's attached to
Yeah.
until you change what it's attached to. So if you grab their Batterskull, they can still whack you with it until you pay 5 to equip it. Or 3 to
I'm
bounce
sure
it.
someone who
Yeah,
hasn't
but you
listened
don't
to
want
our
to bounce
podcast
it
will do that.
because it
Yeah.
goes back to their hand.
Yeah. So anyway, for Vintage, I think this guy will be a monster, and he also has the keyword pitches to force, of course. And he's a monster against shops if you can get him down early enough. Being 1 mana cheaper than Jace puts him, at least in the realm of being castable against shops. My assumption too is you're probably on some artifact heavy deck as well, so you should be
I
running
like the idea of of your opponent going Tinker, Blightsteel. You're like, okay, Dack Fayden, take your Blightsteel. Your turn. Your opponent drops Dack Fayden. No, my Blightsteel. And then you keep going.
I really like the emblem is interesting. I don't think it's good enough, but I mean, I just think it would be really cool where you're like, oh, -6 whenever I cast a spell that targets 1 or more permanents. I'd be like, oh, Fire Ice. I'll use Fire. I'll target these 2 things. Oh, okay. It feels like it would be fun.
You're kind
Yeah,
of
if you're
leading to...
-6ing him, you're really showboating. I mean, you're either on like infinite turns with Vault Key and you're just having fun, or something has gone very wrong for your opponent if you have Faithless looted like 4 fucking times and you're able to get the emblem.
Yeah, I think the problem with the emblem is, like, in Vintage or in Legacy, how many cards target your opponent's stuff and don't destroy it or bounce it?
There's one card, Pyroblast. And I really feel like no, really.
Yeah.
Because,
That's
like,
not terrible.
Miracles, like the American version that Joey Lossett plays, always, I mean, not always, but kind of has the problem that Pyroblast is sometimes dead. And I really feel Dack Fayden could be very good in Miracles. Because the +1 ability is good, it's really good. The -2 ability, okay, well, whatever, it's okay. And if you get to ultimate it, your Pyroblast suddenly actually become, like, better mind controls. So
Except they can't target blue things, because otherwise he'll just kill them.
okay, I can live with that.
Now I want to use
I don't steal your
Pyroblast
chase.
to steal a Mox. That's what I want to do.
Or Liliana, right? You'd be like, Pyroblast your Liliana. Oh wait, it's mine now. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, he I didn't think of that in Miracles. I guess he also maybe could again another card that really doesn't see a lot of play, but you get red, white, blue and you have land tax in play. His +1
now you're
becomes
going deep.
fairly insane.
That's true. All in all, I don't like this set.
All right, well we'll try to get through it.
Oh, we're still going?
Yeah,
I think it's generally more casually oriented in the first place, so yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's better than Journey into Dicks. Anyway,
Go ahead.
all right. Another gold card here, and this one is I mention him only because he has some comparable cards who have seen play in Eternal formats, but Dax Duplicate, creature shapeshifter, 2 blue-red. You may have Dax Duplicate enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it gains haste and dethrone. So we have basically a
Whoa.
clone. Only when you clone, you have a hasted Blightsteel, and if your opponent has more life, your Blightsteel is now slightly bigger. So after combat, you will have a 1/1 withered Blightsteel. What about this guy? I mean, we've got Metamorph, which has seen a reasonable amount of play, mostly because it can copy artifacts. We have Phantasmal Image, which has seen a reasonable amount of play in Merfolk decks or decks in which the thing that you're going to be imaging has either Shroud or Hexproof. This is a little scarier in that, for your opponent anyway, in that the thing you copy gets haste and might be slightly bigger. Thoughts? Also is a 0/0 like all the other metamorphs, so can be tutored up with Recruiter and whatnot.
Yeah, I don't know. 4 mana's a lot for you listed all those cards that do almost the same thing for significantly less mana.
You should also note that it doesn't really combo with Show and Tell. If you choose this and your opponent chooses Emrakul, you don't get to copy that.
Yeah, yeah. But if you just let it resolve, untap, and copy Emrakul, then they're fucked.
Yeah, they're super fucked.
Because you have a hasted, slightly bigger Emrakul. All right. Well, anyway, just worth thinking about, and also worth noting. I think most people know this, but none of these cards are legal in Modern. They're only legal in
Eternal formats, actual Eternal formats.
All right, a couple more to go. This one is pretty interesting. He is Grenzo Dungeon Warden. His casting cost is X black red. He is a legendary creature goblin rogue. So being a goblin rogue is almost always a good thing. He's a 2/2, and Grenzo Dungeon Warden enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. And he has an ability 2: put the bottom card of your library into your graveyard. If it's a creature card with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, put it onto the battlefield. So I guess what immediately comes to mind is that this is some kind of anti-terminus card. Unfortunately, the designers of this card don't realize that Goblins is probably one of the best decks against fighting Terminus because they can just continue to shit more Goblins out. And any seasoned Miracle player will probably tell you that Goblins, if you're not playing Moat anyway, Goblins can be a really tough matchup because of their ability to just overwhelm you with card advantage. So he's a Goblin who's as big as you want to make him, which that's okay, I guess, as well. The second ability, again, it's constrained by the fact that the dude has to have power less than or equal to Grenzo, so unless you're doing something silly with him, you're unlikely to be able to do any reanimate show and tell style shenanigans where the guy that you're pulling off the bottom is absurd in some way, barring something stupid like a Triskelion or a 0/0 that doesn't get its power boost until it comes into the battlefield. It's also worth noting that Tarmogoyf's splat is it's static, so in all zones, Tarmogoyf will be bigger than Grenzo in all likelihood. So
it's also Tarmogoyf will be in your graveyard when it checks itself, so it can possibly grow itself and make it so you couldn't get it.
Yeah, I mean you could. There's a bunch of cards that put stuff on the bottom of your library. Most of them suck ass. Others, like there's Jotun Grunt comes to mind, obviously. Getting Terminus comes to mind. There are several shitty Soldevi Digger iterations that have been printed over the years, most of which suck.
Preordain's not terrible.
But anyway, just as a goblin, yeah. Any thoughts on this guy, Sam? You played Miracles quite a bit. You see this being a goblin staple that could hurt a Miracles deck?
When this was first spoiled, I went through and looked at the most recent times that Goblins had done well in major tournaments, and you can have this guy enter with X = 0 and get a fair amount of the Goblins deck, so that is pretty good. But 4 mana to get 1 extra dude one time, 6 mana to get 2 extra dudes, I don't know if that's worth it unless you happen to hit, like, Lackey, which is just insane, or something like that. I just don't think he's going to be worth the investment that you put into him.
I think he's actually really good with that Treasonous guy that we were talking about before, where you can pay life for mana. So you can be like, oh, I'll pay like 9 life to give this guy some counters, and then you'll pay some more life, 6 life actually, to use the ability. So, no, this guy's garbage.
Alright, well, what's the best case scenario for a Goblin deck? Probably their Vial is on 2, right? Because who gives a fuck if he's bigger than 2? 2 gets you everyone, right? Gets you your Ringleader.
I think 2 is one of the... Wait, what?
I think
Ringleader
basically... I think basically what you want to do is flip War Chief off the bottom and be like, oh, all my guys gain haste, and then you violin like Siege Gang Commander or something.
Well, I'm
Or you do
saying
it.
end of turn, your vial is on 2. Your vial is on 2, and you keep this guy in your hand. If you're playing against a Miracles deck, you basically should always have this guy in your hand, almost like a counterspell, right? Because he guarantees that if you get Terminus and you have this guy in hand with a vial, that you can get, X divided by 2 guys back, where X is the number of the amount of mana you have access to, right?
So basically, Siege Gang Commander on the bottom would be pretty darn good as well.
Exactly, yeah. So he has 2 power, so he satisfies Grenzo, so you could shit your Siege Gang back out from underneath your library. And correct me if I'm wrong, Terminus, I get to order the creatures as the person who...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which
Yes,
most
you do.
people just ignore because they're going to end up shuffling later, but this is a case where it actually matters.
Yeah.
And I think I like this actual, like they're actually starting to explore the whole bottom of the library thing, which is something that we haven't really gone into in a long time, except with like Soul Heavy Digger or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that's especially cool with how many things put stuff on the bottom of the library, and we're talking about miracles. We've got Terminus. You've also got Jace the Mind Sculptor. I don't know if you've heard of him. He puts a lot of stuff on bottoms of libraries, and this guy just responds and goes, yeah, I think I'll have that card back.
Unless it's a
Turns out it was
land.
a land.
Oh, next level, bitch. All right, well, outside of Goblin decks, it's probably going to be tough to find a home for this dude. I play a lot of Dega, and I don't even think I want him in Dega necessarily, because he doesn't really have a lot of ways to protect himself. He doesn't hit especially hard. So, anyway. Also worth noting, I guess, I need to look up the wording. Do all the ringleaders force you to put the matched types in your hands? Let's see.
Yeah,
I'm not sure,
Ricky, I think they put, yeah.
Yeah, put all
force you.
goblin cards. All right, so you can't choose to put a high casting cost goblin on the bottom and then use this guy to cheat him into play. So that would be another cool interaction. But oh well. All right, so there's Grenzo. Anybody have any closing thoughts on him? He will probably pop up at some point in a goblin list, but likely to not make any huge waves, right?
This is
I don't
another
think so.
guy, like a lot of the new printings in this set, that is maybe playable in Eternal and just absolutely insane in EDH.
Yeah.
Because you cast this guy as your general at like 12 and then just like basically show and tell every card in your deck.
Yeah. I mean, I've played Black Red Goblins, not to derail the fucking podcast into the world of neckbeardy EDH, but I played a lot of Wart Bogart Annie, like super aggro degenerate Wart Bogart Annie with all the black tutors and then a Goblin Shell to find. And, it's hard to believe he'd be much better than her. She's insane. She's regrowth every turn for, like, your fucking goblins. So it's tough to imagine he'd be much better. But anyway, couple more cards. The next one actually is a potential card in something like Reanimator, Magister of Worth. So this is 4 black-white, creature angel, flying 4/4, will of the council. When Magister of Worth enters the battlefield starting with a U, each player votes for grace or condemnation. If grace gets more votes, each player returns each creature card from his graveyard to the battlefield. So, like a Super Living Death or Twilight's Call. If condemnation gets more votes or the vote is tied, which I anticipate will be the majority of the cases, destroy all creatures other than Magister of Worth. Julian, what do you think about this in something like a Reanimator deck? Would this replace anything? What situations would you want to use this in?
Well, I think it's okay in this kind of deck. You obviously basically always destroy all the other creatures, and it's competing in the same slot like Elish Norn and Blazing Archon against all the Swarm aggro decks. So usually you're behind whenever you get a creature to the table, so it's either going to be Grizzlebrand and you're going to abuse the lifelink to stay in the game, which is a problem because once they actually destroy their own creature, you don't really get the lifelink. So there may be situations where you want the Magister of Worth, but most of the time you will probably just want Elish Norn to kind of recover. But I can see people trying it, and I can see it being good in certain number of games. But overall, it's got a hard time competing against Elish Norn, but I can definitely see it being worth Magister of Worth.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think-
I mean, it's not a legend, which is...
Oh yeah, that's really interesting.
It's also like show and tell, kind of like, oh, it can come in and, I'll destroy all creatures, and, that seems okay. But it's actually a strict upgrade to Megiddo the Lion,
I fucking hate
So
it.
I think there are a lot of cards that are strict upgrade.
overall, I think the card has some game. I mean, it's possible that say, hey, everybody wants to return their stuff, and your opponent makes a mistake and realizes that you've actually got way more stuff in your graveyard, and you just destroy them.
You're probably
But
winning
destroying
that
all,
game anyway if they haven't been paying attention to your graveyard and you're playing Reanimator.
that's true. But also too, I mean, even 6 mana, like, I guess you could try this as like a one of as your like really top end in black white control or something like that. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah, 6 is attainable in some formats. Um, I don't know. I'm trying to think of any other. One other interesting interaction with this guy is like in an oath deck. Um, so if you're mixing and matching creatures, maybe this guy could. I don't know. Blazing Archon is just better. Just yeah. You have the recently printed. What's the name of the Archon? The new Archon, the one that exiles a permanent when it comes in play and
Ashen
leaves.
Rider.
Ashen Rider. Yeah. Um, Ashen Rider is also quite a fisting. So I don't know. It would be compelling. I guess two couple things. One, it's not a legend. Two, there is a hair's chance that you could actually cast this. I mean, it's 6, and the color requirements aren't insane. So
So a Deathrite Shaman's come down on turn 5.
fair enough. You could curve into this. Yeah. All right. Any more thoughts on this? Probably not a whole lot outside of Tribal Angels and or Reanimator,
I
right?
do have one thought, and that's you mentioned this in Oath. And if this thing wraths in Oath, that seems really bad for the Oath player, as your opponent now gets to Oath.
But you can
Yes.
still keep your what's it called? The Orc card untapped and give your opponent another creature
Oh, that's
afterwards.
right. You're right. You could do that.
But if they fuck up really badly, there's a chance you have a bunch of really cool stuff in your graveyard, and if they choose Grace, maybe because they're a practicing Christian or something, then you get all your stuff in your graveyard back that you somehow didn't put on the battlefield because there was a.
Yeah, somebody will put together a really sweet Mindslaver build of the council deck.
All right, I failed there. All right, moving on to our last couple of cards here, and then we'll be done with this set. Um, we have artifacts. Most of them are dreadful, and several of them actually can't be played because they have the reveal X as you draft it keyword, which I think any of the ones that have that, I believe, are not. Is that correct? I haven't read the.
I believe they're legal, but they don't do anything, so it doesn't matter. Kind of
Okay.
like
All right, so you can get.
Paulina the High City, which is a rare and taps for colors based on what you say when you draft. So if you were to play that in Legacy or Vintage, it would tap for nothing.
Or the thing that says roll the planar die. I forget what that thing's called.
What do you mean you don't have a planar die?
I think, yeah, it's Fractured Power Stone, right? The plane chase thing. Yeah, it's a shitty Mind Stone that says roll the planar die, activate this ability anytime you cast sorcery. Unfortunately, the rules are ambiguous. It says that the ability will have no effect, but it doesn't say that you can't activate it. So in theory, you could play something like Fractured Power Stone in Vintage, activate the second ability, and then just sit there. So if you're doing that, you're probably drunk or high or both. Anyway, there was one artifact that merited a little bit of discussion anyway, probably only for Vintage, but it would be Coercive Portal. 4, artifact, it's a mythic. Will of the Council. At the beginning of your upkeep, starting with you, each player votes for Carnage or Homage. If Carnage gets more votes, sacrifice Coercive Portal and destroy all non-land permanents. If Homage gets more votes, or the vote is tied, draw a card. So I think the only thing that this could possibly get any sniff in would be a workshop deck. Um, I think it's an interesting card only because I think it's a bluffer's dream. So this is all happening at your upkeep. So obviously, if your opponent has some kind of board advantage, and they're winning, they are likely going to vote homage, right? Which will essentially give you a personal howling mine. If they're losing and they have no board state, they'll probably vote for Carnage, but they'll also know that you'll never vote for Carnage because you have a personal howling mine, so you're gonna vote homage. Um, at the same time, if you have stuff in hand that you've been sandbagging, you can bluff a little bit with this card. Um, I think it's an interesting card. I don't know that it's better. You've got other things like Staff of Nin if you want to go over the top,
Yeah.
and a number of other cards. But it's definitely an interesting card to put in a workshop deck, which sometimes struggles playing off the top. I mean, worst case, you just animate this guy with like a Karn and beat the shit out of your opponent with it. But the the card itself is just interesting. It's an interesting card, and I hate to use the skill tester here, but it's definitely like a skill tester, and it would let you maybe expand upon your bluffing skills. What does everyone think of this pile of
I'm just going
artifacts?
to interrupt right now because just so we know that I've got to go, but I'm going to leave the call going.
Yeah,
So if we're all good, sorry I can't stay.
it's all right. We understand that you have other
It
needs.
is the will of the council that you
I do.
leave.
So good.
Yeah, it's definitely a coercive portal. Definitely interesting because workshop can almost certainly, well, not almost certainly, workshop can frequently cast this on turn 1 and almost certainly on turn 2 if they draw it. But I don't see this being more than a 1 or 2 of. Maybe in like a welder slaver build where you can get this thing back all the time and you can do the votes for them. That would be pretty neat.
I mean, we're obviously not talking about legacy applications, so... I mean, in Vintage, you already mentioned it, that you probably want Staff of Nin, because it's got, like, more utility overall, but I think it's basically always just gonna be your personal holding mine, which is okay, especially in workshops, but overall, I think, I think people will stick to Staff of Nin, but you can definitely try it. If you wanna go, like, have the card sooner, you will probably play it, like, at least one turn sooner than Staff of Nin.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, another comparable would be something like Bottle Cloister, which you just can't afford to play in Vintage because obviously if it gets bounced, you get Mind Twisted. Um, I guess another thing would be if you're playing a bunch of Null Rods, this thing just sits there and isn't affected by Null Rod.
Oh, that's a good idea, actually.
Yeah,
I've seen it before, like, there are these versions of stacks or workshops that really use Nylrod.
yeah, the popular version is that you're going to see Null Rod in is the version that's going to also play Smokestack and uh, probably go with the full 13 spheres, Smokestacks, Null Rods, and likely 3 or 4 Crucible of Worlds. And this thing sort of ensures us. You'll never vote for Carnage. That's like the most permanent heavy version of Workshop, but ensuring a steady stream of cards to keep up with your own stack until you can get a Crucible in is not bad. Again, there's a lot of competition. I mean, anytime you're talking about vintage and shops, you're talking about 20 plus years of cards that this thing has to compete with. But yes, with Staff of Nin seeing play, I think that's a decent comparison. But anyway, that's all I had on that guy. I don't know if anybody else has any more thoughts on that.
This is making me think: how frequently is somebody going to stifle will of the council? Because
Can you stifle it?
well,
I
on
think you
almost all
can't.
of these, they're triggered abilities. Like at the beginning of your upkeep, do X,
Oh, you mean that? Okay.
or like
Oh,
on
yeah, yeah,
Magister of
true.
Worth, it's when it enters the battlefield.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was thinking about the white card. Is that also a trigger?
No, that just happens on resolution.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, overall, an interesting set. I haven't gotten any yet. I'm waiting to get it in not English. Unfortunately, the set was only printed in Chinese, Japanese, and English. No German, Julian. So you're out of luck.
Whoa. I'm so sorry for all my German friends who want to draft that.
Well, they can always
Uh,
send me all their German cards. um,
you like them? You like the Samen Schaukelhexe?
there's a certain tiering of languages that I like, but sometimes German is just over the top in terms of the absurdity of the number of consonants in the card. In which case, German takes uh, takes precedence. That or the presence of the word Gedanken usually puts it over the top.
What's it with you Americans and Gedanken?
I don't know why it flows from the mouth well. It just sounds better to Gedankenverben than it does, or God, there's so many Gedankens. Uh,
That's brainstorm, isn't it?
yeah, Gedankenverbal
Gedankenwirbel.
is brainstorm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know what Gedanken means?
thought, right?
Yeah, thoughts. It's plural.
Yeah, yeah. Um, another fantastic German Gedanken is Thoughtlash, a reserve list diamond from alliances, and that is Gedankenopfer.
That's a thought sacrifice.
Yeah. Card's fucking fantastic. It's one of the few cards that lets you just exile your whole library for blue 2. So if you have your lab man out, you are set with Thoughtlash. But that's for another podcast. So we have a few M15 cards spoiled. Probably not a whole lot worth talking about here. Maybe like 3 cards. I guess we'd start off talking about the what do you call it? The community card Waste Not. It's probably got the most discussion around it. This one's been spoiled for a little while, but black 1, whenever an opponent, sorry, and it's an enchantment. Black 1, enchantment, Waste Not. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, put a 2/2 black zombie token onto the battlefield. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, Basil Thrall. And whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. So there's been a bit of discussion around this card. I think anytime you have a card that basically says do nothing until you do something else, it usually knocks the card back a bit. So Waste Not by itself, if it's just sitting there, doesn't do a whole lot unless your opponent is moving to their discard step because they don't have any lands, in which case you're probably winning anyway. I think the assumption with Waste Not is that you're going to be pairing it with the plethora of black discard effects. The problem being that you have to spend a card in Waste Not to enhance the abilities of your Lilianas, your Hymns, your Thoughtseizes, your Winds of Change, your whatever other goofball discard cards you're playing with. So I think it's an interesting card. It's got legs. I think I applaud them for getting the casting cost down to 1 black. I think there was some early thoughts that the casting cost might be 3 CMC. I think we all agree if it was 1 black, it would have a lot of legs.
It would be completely nuts.
Yeah, but at black 1, it's tough. I just keep thinking unless you're ritualing this card out in like a Pox deck, that you're going to draw it on turn 5 when a Delver is about to take your last 3 life and just want to rip it in half and set it on fire.
That's the exact problem I see with this card. It's like so conditional, and even if you trigger it, chances are you won't even be able to use it, and you will just take your life and you draw it like anywhere later than turn 4. I mean, what kind of deck would you build around it? Pox, yeah, like that's probably even the only deck I could see running that card, and even then, I don't know. Like both decks, usually when you play Pox, are playing from the top, and if you make them discard a land card, which will probably not even happen because they will just play it out, maybe. I mean, it's so incredibly conditional, and from a competitive point of view, conditional cards always have a hard time like being actually playable, and that's my problem with Waste Not.
I have a friend at the store who's been playtesting this in Pox, and I will say this card is nuts on turn 1, just because most of their deck is going to be activating this card. So if you've got, say, Swamp, Ritual, Waste Not, and a discard spell, you can either do the discard spell to make sure Waste Not resolves, or get Waste Not down, and then immediately get an ability out of Waste Not. It's in the first couple turns in Pox, every time I've played against it, Waste Not has just been absolutely insane. But that's a pretty narrow place
but
for
then
it
you
to
could
be.
also Dark Ritual into Liliana.
Yeah, but Liliana
If you're
only
going for
gets
that.
you slight incremental advantage. It only gets you 1 card a turn. You just get your other spells that get you all the cards. I don't know.
Yeah, but then they just play a Delver and you're behind. Then you get your 2/2 zombie and they still got the Delver. And then you maybe get some mana and they still have the Delver. I mean, yeah, Pox, of course, Pox has ways to deal with creatures. But I think if you're talking about like a Dark Ritual-based deck, there are I mean, your friends did the testing. I didn't do it, so maybe I'm wrong on this. But I feel there are other and better cards to Dark Ritual out. I mean, not a lot of better cards, but especially Liliana overall.
Well, and that also depends on, we're talking about having to have 3 cards in hand, so it kind of depends what you have.
Yeah.
One place
Wouldn't
this
you
has...
want- I mean, I can think of cards off the top of my head that I'd rather have in Pox for black 1 that are going to sit there. I'd rather have Chains of Mephistopheles 9 out of 10 times.
Oh, yes.
I mean, Pox decks have no shortage of making bad 2/2s with no evasion. Like, that's not a problem. You often can't do anything with the extra black. I mean, yes, the nut draw is Dark Ritual, Waste Not, Thoughtseize you, take fucking something, make a zombie. Is that great? I don't think it's, I mean...
You can play the card that makes them discard a non-basic land and then use the 2 mana to play Dark Confident.
Ostracize. I think your opponent would just quit and go home if you Dark Ritual, Waste Not, ostracize their only fetch land, use the other 2 black to play Skittering Scourge and beat them to death with it.
Where the zombie's been most effective for him has generally been when you get a zombie super early, like you turn 1, Thoughtseize away a Delver or something with this out, and then you just continue to wreck their mana base so that they never get anything out, and you just beat them to death over 10 turns with a 2/2.
I think a Pox deck is probably going to...
But
Yeah, I mean, a Pox deck, even without Waste Not, is going to pound Rug Delver so hard. Like, what the fuck are they going to do against a deck with, like, 8 basic swamps, wastelands, fucking innocent blood. That's a
They can
pretty good
stifle
matchup.
Scroll Rack, or not Scroll Rack, Curse Scroll. They can stifle Curse Scroll.
They can stifle Curse Scroll. They can stifle your Nether Spirit trigger and keep it at bay for a turn. That's a great
I
matchup.
think
Anyway,
the best use for Stifle is the Wasteland, I guess.
yeah. I mean, if you're too poor to afford Chains of Mephistopheles, maybe you put this in your Pox deck. But yeah, I don't.
And well, let's be honest. If you're playing Pox, there is a strong chance that Chains is not within your budget.
Yeah, that's true. I guess.
You can use it with Recoil, from Invasion.
Oh,
I'm a fan.
I'm
a colorless, a blue and a black, instant, return target permanent to its owner's hand, then that player discards a card. So if they're Hellbent, you actually get to choose how to trigger and remove one of their cards. But that's cute.
Yeah. Well, anyway, a lot of hype. I think the community tried to. The community cards have the issue of they can't be broken in standard, right? So like,
and in general, they tend to be very Timmy as well.
Yeah, and like if they made this one black, I think it would be a playable card in Eternal formats. I still don't even know that it would be fantastic. Again, it's a miserable top deck.
But one black, you can go Ritual Waste Not Hymn to Turok and immediately trigger it twice.
Yeah, that's swinging for the fences. But I mean, you could probably go Carnophage Hymn to Turok and win a lot of games too on the first turn. So anyway, I guess that's it for Waste Not. A lot of hype, but I don't think it really. I don't know necessarily that it's going to be a dominant card. Back to this new set. There's a few fringe playables, so maybe worth talking about. I don't think it'll take a lot of time, but like Void Snare, an interesting card for Burning Wish based combo. It's, I believe, the cheapest sorcery speed bounce. So it's essentially return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand for blue, and it's a sorcery.
I would love this card if it was an instant.
You would love it if it was an instant?
Yeah, I could really see like some kind of tempo deck developing.
Yeah.
With this card. If it was instant. Sorcery is nah. Because now you can't really hit equipments and it's nah. But instant-wise, I think Vapor Snake, for example, always has been on the verge of being like playable in Legacy. And people have played it, and I can see people playing Vapor Snake in like dedicated like mono blue tempo decks. I mean, it wouldn't be like a tier 1 strategy, but it would be a strategy, and a card like Void Snare would like perfectly fit into that.
Yeah, with Snapcaster mages just making your opponent's life miserable. All right, we got a couple more cards in M13. One of them is it is a squid, which I think Sam pre-bought 100 of these squids.
What?
Are you talking about Chasm Skulker?
It is the Chasm Skulker. 2 blue, get ready, creature, horror, squid. So this is a nightmarish squid from the depths of the sea. He is a 1/1 when he enters the battlefield, but he reads, whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Chasm Skulker. When Chasm Skulker dies, put X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens on the battlefield, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Chasm Skulker. Worth noting, the tokens are not horrors.
But they have Island Walk, which is to say they are unblockable in Legacy.
Yes, sorry, with Island Walks. This spoiler site has betrayed me here and didn't put that in the actual text of them. So, going back to our Sea Stompy type deck, you can power this man out and have a 1/1 with no evasion. You can untap and then have a Gray Ogre. Anyone see, I mean, the obvious card that you're going to look at when you see this guy is, wow, if I have this guy in play and I fucking brainstorm, sweet times. The issue I have is that we've had a guy named Lorescale Quaddle who's been around for, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years. And it reads a lot of the same. Doesn't have the cool squid poop thing when it dies, but basically has seen 0 play. I can't remember the last time I saw Lorescale Quaddle in Legacy. Sam, thoughts on this since you got one tattooed on your left ass cheek?
I think it's definitely really cool. The redeeming ability of this is the fact that it leaves something behind, so when they inevitably kill this, you're not just left, with your dick in your hand. But at 2 blue, that's a fairly steep investment for most decks, and they're probably going to bolt or plow this thing before it gets very big, and it's going to poop out maybe 1 or 2 squids that they're not really too worried about.
Well, if you
Is it
play
is
this
it
guy
two blue?
conservatively and leave a blue up, and they bolt it, and you brainstorm, then you've got them.
Then you've got just such value.
I think isn't the mana cost like a single blue and 2 colorless?
Yes.
Because that's what it says
Yeah.
in the spoiler.
Yep.
Because you meant like 2 blue,
Two and a
like
blue.
leaving up brainstorm, playing it and leaving up brainstorm.
Yeah. Sorry, leave a brainstorm up. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I was just going through the spoiler. I think the problem is if they start to plowshares it, well, you don't get anything.
Yep.
I also think another problem with this is, like you said, a Stompy type deck would really like this, but a Stompy type deck is probably going to have a hard time casting their own brainstorm because of chalices or trinispheres or something of that nature that just makes this an even worse proposition. I guess on the flip side, maybe they can't cast their removal, so you can slowly build this guy up, but yeah, I like this
slow
guy. I
is
just
something
don't
you
see
don't
him
want to do in Stompies. You know, you want to be winning the game on the 4th, 5th turn. You don't want to be dicking around with a horror squid. I'd rather just be smashing somebody with a Sea Drake equipped with a Sword of Fire and Ice. All right, poor squid. There's a couple more cards. One is hold on, let me get the name of this thing. It's not on Magic spoiler. You are now not officially the.
There are some cool names in this set. Avarice Amulet. I don't care what that does. That sounds awesome.
There is also Meteorite, which I think is sweet, but
I think flavor-wise it's cool.
yeah, the flavor on it is outstanding. Here, well, let's do Meteorite. Meteorite says it's 5. When it enters the battlefield, deal 3 damage to any target, and then it can tap for colorless mana. So obviously not a legacy card, but worth noting that in Vintage, this card does a few things that no other card does for a shop deck. And it's been maligned a little bit in some of the Vintage message boards. But it does one thing pretty well. If you have a Null Rod and or your opponent has a Null Rod or a Stony Silence out, it can kill Jace dead if they've just brainstormed, which is popular in Vintage. It also can kill a Trigon Predator dead. To the point where if I were to ever play Meteorite in Vintage, I would have mine altered, and underneath the rock there would be a Trigon Predator, squished, dying with its entrails hanging out from underneath it.
With Jace tending to him, trying to ease
Yeah,
his
trying
pain.
to revive him, so my Lodestone Golem stopped.
Come on, Trigon Predator, what's going on? No, please don't die, no!
Get up, man!
What's wrong with you?
But I mean that's about it. It's probably a Vintage only card that it's also cute with Goblin Welder, but if you have an active welder, you could probably do way more degenerate things than just Meteorite bombing people.
I'm gonna lightning bolt you every turn. Ooh.
Yeah, like Triskelion. The other comparable to that, obviously, Triskelion, who for 6 gets you a 4/4 body. Trike doesn't work under a Null Rod, but it's Trike, so it's better in many other ways. I guess none of you play Vintage shops, so probably talking more about Meteorite is going to bore you to death.
I would like to play Vintage shops, but the shops alone are like over $2,000 now.
I mean, how much more is a shop than an Underground Sea?
About 150, 200 right now, I think.
Fuck it.
I'll keep playing blue until I get another bonus or something.
Well, if you come to Eternal Weekend, you'll have plenty of opportunities to play against shops, and then
Yeah,
probably
I'm
one.
sure I will.
When is Eternal Weekend?
Sure, yeah. Let's talk about Eternal Weekend. So Eternal Weekend is where the Vintage champs and the Legacy champs that were formerly.
Yeah, I know.
Oh well, no. This is for our listeners, Julie. Not all.
Sorry,
Not everyone is as smart as you, Julian.
Yeah, not
Sorry.
everyone's as worldly as you.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're not at they're of course not at Gen Con anymore. Top Deck Games hosts them, and this year it's the 24th through the 26th this year, October.
Okay.
So last year it was over Halloween weekend, or the weekend after Halloween weekend, and it was an absolute fucking blast. You get, I've already booked my suite. I'm ready to go. For those of you deciding, and a similar thing happened last year. There was a Legacy GP within I think 2 weeks of this. Yeah, I think the advantage of Eternal Weekend is if you're powered or have bazaars or something, you basically get 2 shots to win. Whereas with a GP, 2 or 3 bad hands on day 1, and your weekend's essentially shot. I think if you don't own power, you don't own any Vintage cards. Probably the GP in New Jersey is maybe a better deal for you. But also worth noting, this is in Philadelphia, right downtown by the Reading Market, so it's a great time. Restaurants, booze, everything around there is awesome. whereas the GP is in Edison, which is kind of like an awkward suburb of Newark, about an hour and a half away from the city or any meaningful, stuff.
Just far enough that you can't go into the city like each night. You can go in one time,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is kind of how DC was.
Oh, DC's a fucking failure. I mean, being out in Dulles is they should be not allowed to even call those Washington GPs because they're not even close.
Was it like miles away or?
By public transportation, it took us, I think, an hour and 10 minutes to get to the capital.
And that was off
That's
traffic,
like-
right? That was like off.
That's like they have
That
an
was
airport.
that was in the middle of the
airport is
day
called-
with no traffic, and I think
Yeah.
it cost us
Yeah.
$9 a person to get that far. And the cabs were like $75.
Okay. We have an airport here in Munich. It's called Airport Munich West, and nobody really knows where it is because it's like over 2 hours away from Munich.
That
But
is
they call
basically what
themselves-
Dulles is. Dulles is like an hour's drive west of Washington, D.C. if there's any kind of traffic. And the tournament organizer for the GPs in Washington, they rent out this bombed out Sam's Club / Walmart that they call a convention center.
You know,
It's just
that's
a giant empty box.
that sounds terrible, but that's an excellent description of what the place was. It looked like an old warehouse store. It was like in a strip center, and yeah, it's an excellent description of the experience.
It's completely miserable because it's isolated from any real public transportation. There's basically no hotels, and the one that's in the parking lot doesn't give a convention rate. The ones that do are actually across the highway. So when you look them up on Google Maps, they're like 0.8 miles. So you're like, oh, I'm going to walk to the convention center. And then you realize there's a goddamn 12-lane highway in between you and the
Yeah.
fucking convention center, and you have to walk 6 miles to get to a bridge to go across and back up to get to the place. So
Yeah, all the convention hotels were actually airport hotels, which
Yeah.
on the plus side meant that all of them had shuttles to the airport, which could get you public transit into DC, and shuttles to the convention center. That was pretty much the only positive of that, though.
yeah, and I started off 4-0 and then drew 2 shitty hands and dropped and went to go eat. So anyway,
Are you guys also gonna come to GP New Jersey?
I don't know. I'm still torn because with Star City doing the GP, you know it's going to be an awesome GP. They've already said that they're looking into doing a big vintage side event, which really pushes me towards it. But I think until there's more information about what the side events at both events will be, I'm going to hold off because I probably can't afford the vacation and the flights to go to the Northeast twice in a month.
Yeah. I mean, it would be awesome because right now we are putting together like an European legacy team to go to the GP in New Jersey. We are having like Philipp Schöniger and Mark we had on the podcast like earlier this year, and I'm still not sure if I can go because I mean I think I can afford it, but we also want to go to the Star City games like I think 1 or 2 weeks later in Richmond. So I would need like 10 days of vacation, and I'm still not sure if I can make it. But I mean,
Don't y'all Europeans
you're
get like
guys
6
telling me
months of
that-
vacation or something?
no,
is that just
like
the French?
31 days per year. No, that's like 31 days per year, but we got like a lot of bank holidays.
Sam, don't you know that Germany props up the entire European economy? Their people can't work. Everyone else is a debtor state.
That's what I've heard.
All right, so yeah, but worth noting the New Jersey GP, which is Legacy, is November 14th through 16th. So this year there's a reasonable gap between Eternal Weekend. I guess reasonable being a couple of weeks. So that could be one thing. Y'all could come early and then hit Eternal Weekend and then hit the GP, the Legacy GP, if you guys are powered. So
I think that's no problem. I never owned Power in my entire life, but I've always played Power, so that's always a way.
yeah, well, it's because you bought all of our power because the euro was worth $2.
Yeah, people have been talking about this like several years ago. All the power went to Europe.
That is why the euro was $2
It's
to.
the Euro, and wasn't Star City running vintage events that did not require power, but they were
Yep.
giving away power, so you get it and you say, well, I don't need this. Ship it to Europe where they will give me, a euro for $1 for it, which is pretty freaking good.
Yep. Anyway, the few Americans like myself who are still powered, we still try to bear the torch. All right, back to our set review. We'll wrap it up here. There's a couple more spells that are perhaps playable. One of them is Ulcerate.
Cool
Black.
name.
Yes. Ulcerate sounds like what Julian had to deal with his patient vomiting blood on him. Ulcerate. Black.
Not
Target
good.
creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, and you lose 3 life. So the obvious comparable here is on one side Disfigure, and on the other side Dismember. Is there any reason to run Ulcerate over either of those two?
Kills bigger stuff but hurts you? Yeah, I don't know. Again, good in Death's Shadow.
I think Dismember just is always pretty much superior because Dismember gets around Chalice 1. Your worst case scenario with Dismember is you're paying 4 life, so you're paying 1 more life than Ulcerate, but you're often going to be able to kill Tarmogoyf.
Well, and if we're comparing it to Ulcerate, then we're assuming we have black mana, which makes Dismember a lot easier to cast because you're probably not paying that 4 life. You're probably paying 2 or maybe even no life.
Yeah, that's also very fair. So I just don't see this, and I don't see this replacing Disfigure. I think if you're playing Disfigure in your deck, you are principally concerned with the first 2 to 3 turns of the game and dealing with your opponent's Deathray Shaman or their Delver or their Mother of Runes, right? I think any of the Bug Delver decks that play 2 or more Disfigures, that's the principal concern. I guess late game, maybe you win Tarmogoyf fights with it, but generally, that's what you're trying to accomplish with Disfigure, right?
Yes, definitely.
Julian, any thoughts on having a Quirion Ranger targeted with
I'm still
Ulcerate?
looking up the card. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, as you mentioned, like, this is like this figure, but I mean, I can't really see a reason why I would want to give like an additional -1/-1, but also pay 3 life. So overall, I think this figure is way superior.
Yeah. There's nothing tremendously oppressive right now with 3 ass that this card addresses that Disfigure doesn't address, right?
Yeah.
Like Wild Nacatl, it doesn't see a lot of run because Delver is stupid. So yeah.
Yeah, and even with if there was a creature, you could still block and disfigure, and then it dies to your Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah. All right, well, another victim of power creep. I'm sure it'll be a staple in Standard where removal is fucking miserable. I don't know. The other card I saw was just an interesting card. Was Military Intelligence. We've talked a lot about Edric. This is blue 1. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card. Kind of falls into the category of Waste Not. Doesn't do anything by itself. Is super conditional. And even more miserable, actually just triggers once, even if you attack with 1,000 creatures.
Yeah.
So I really can't see that getting any play.
Well, especially when for 1 more you could play Edric.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about Legacy, whenever you're actually in a position to attack with 2 creatures, you're pretty well positioned.
Right.
So I don't know about this card.
I think you'd probably be better off playing the man who has Forecast, who lets you draw a card when you tap your fucking Judge's Familiar. I forget his name. He's a giant knight.
Giant Knight.
God damn. Alright, hold on. Magic cards that info. Court Hussar. No. Sky Hussar. Yes.
That was played on camera at SCG a month and a half ago. Some guy was playing a deck with Sky Hussar and a bunch of other crazy stuff. Martyr of Sands was in the deck.
Is it a blue or a white? Oh, it's white and or blue creatures you control. Yeah. So I think I would rather have Sky Hussar 9 times out of 10 because it implies that I've got 2 creatures and they're probably small and they probably suck. So, attacking with Curse Catcher, Judge Familiar isn't that impressive. But if I can use Sky Hussar and just draw cards, I think that's better. And then eventually I'll cast a giant 4/3 Flying Knight that untaps all my guys and crush you. Julian is just lost. He's like, what is this fucking knight you're speaking of? Is it a Knight of the Reliquary?
I know
None of these cards are good.
Because it used to be a combo.
Can I natural order for this guy? This card has no text. Please die.
You see me looking at the card and nod my head and be like, what the fuck, man?
See, this is what's nice about having Sean on the cast is he knows all these cards that were good once that are terrible now that maybe we could combo something with.
Yeah, or have always sucked, but I have an obsessive compulsive disorder with,
Sean, you're the kind of person who I'm sure saw Hexmage spoiled and immediately was like, oh yeah, the 27 German Dark Depths that I have in a shoebox.
I do have quite a few German Dark Depths. Dunkler Tiefen, yeah.
Dunkler Tiefen, yeah.
All right, so that's it for our set review.
Oh, there's one more. We've got Julian on here.
Definitely
we can't
one more.
skip the elf.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I thought this guy was so obviously good that we didn't almost have to do stuff. Yeah. Go on, Julian. Talk about your new elf.
So, for me, this is the card I've been waiting for ever since I picked up elves, and that's Reclamation Sage. It's 2 colorless and a green, a 2/1 elf shaman. When Reclamation Sage enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact, Da-da-da-dum. Or enchantment. Yes,
Oh,
please.
fuck you,
Thank
Moat.
you.
Fuck your Moat, asshole.
And it's a 2-1.
Thank you so
as
much.
opposed to 2-2 for Viridian Shaman. But I think Sean will let me get away with it. I think this guy is strictly better than Viridian Shaman.
Let's think. Yes.
This guy,
Yes, he is.
I love this guy. I mean, yeah, mode, yeah, you get an additional auto mode, like your out before was like Desperate Chairman, but generally speaking, it's just more utility, and it's the kind of utility you really want, because you've seen people play like Crosali Pride Mage in the past, and I remember LSV saying that the only reason he's running the Pride Mage is that he really, or I think they ran Pride Mage, that they really don't want to be cold to like something like mode. And with this card, you can feel even better about like not having a Pride Mage, which I think is wrong in the first place. But this card, man, it also kills counterbalance, and I feel like the main application is going to be killing counterbalances, because in the Elves versus Miracles matchup, you very often get them to a point where they put the top on top, and then you just Reclamation Sage and kill the counterbalance. And you even get to do it again, because you bounce it with Viridian Shaman, Viable Symbiote, I mean, Viridian Shaman. It's actually a cool card, but it really has to go, and Reclamation Sage seems so good, I might actually consider playing a second copy, but I don't really think that's justified right now. But definitely gonna have like a foil English copy for my Elf stack.
You can also Green Sun at some absurd cost that the counterbalance player will be unable to deal with. Find him and bin the counterbalance.
Well,
Yeah.
As with Viridian
Yeah.
Shaman, like I said, 3 is such a hard spot to hit already in a countertop deck. So there's a good chance that if you are just casting this from hand, that they won't be able to counter it with their counterbalance.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, one of the ideas is to start running like 1 or maybe even 2 Cavern of Souls. So this guy definitely doesn't get countered at any point, and so you also make room for all your other non-creature spells that you get to resolve now, because you kill the counterbalance. So this guy,
I
awesome.
sometimes bring
Awesome.
a version of Elves to the store that runs 16 Lords, and people always put you on combo Elves, and then they die on like the third turn to a Droga Warcaller that's been Bounty of the Hunted, and this guy will definitely go in that deck, which is a beating. Elves is a lot less.
I mean, it still doesn't really kill
kill
humility, but you can still operate pretty well under humility.
Yeah, that's true.
Especially with Pendelhaven, that I recently included in my list, and it's super, super awesome.
I approve of any Legends cards, especially Pendelhaven. All right, so that's our set reviews. So nothing too exciting, but that's the great part of being an Eternal player, is you don't have to buy a whole lot of cards to continue playing your format. Anything else we wanted to cover? We lost Matt. Any recent tournaments you guys have played in, or interesting anecdotes?
I have an interesting anecdote. I'm gonna pull up the picture so that I can read the board state out. In round 4 yesterday, I played against Cascabalance, and I had never clicked that thread on the source. I thought Cascabalance was a Cascade counterbalance deck, which it is not. It is a Cascade Restore Balance deck. So
I have played against this. Go on, yeah.
My ending board state when I won the game on in round 4, I had Counterbalance, Rest in Peace, Helm, Humility, Meddling Mage, and Aethersworn Canonist all in play. He has Chromanticore, Bloodbraid Elf, and then some guy I had never seen. It was like a Suspend 7. Whenever something goes to your graveyard, you can remove a time counter from it. It was a 4/4 with flying. But when
No. It's a 4/4 with fear. That is Nihilith. Yeah. Abrupt Decay that, motherfucker.
But when he cast Chromanticore, like I looked at my board and I already had the Aethersworn Canonist and I had the Meddling Mage out, and I show him my hand. I'm like, I could force this, but I want to let Chromanticore resolve in Legacy.
I played against this deck maybe 3 weeks back when I was on Dega, and game 1 I was fortunate to have a ton of removal, but he kept playing the Invasion Sacklands, and I thought maybe he was on Jockle Hops, which is, every budget neckbeard's favorite card. So I was holding back a couple of lands and Swords to Plowshares, and he tried to nut me with sack all my lands, Bloodbraid Elf, and he actually hit, I think he went Bloodbraid, Shardless, Restore Balance, and almost got me, but I had Sandbag Land and 2 Sword Splashers, so I squeaked that game out. Game 2, he fucking wrecked me with some giant fucking spider. Are you familiar with this cascading spider?
Yeah, it costs like 6 and 2 color mana, so it
Yeah.
can cascade into the entire deck.
Are we still talking about
Yes,
Legacy?
we are talking
Yes.
about a Legacy deck.
Yeah,
as if
enlisted
spiders
worm.
wasn't enough.
Sorry, I said spider. It is a
Cascade.
fucking worm. It's just cascade blank text
Oh,
box.
okay.
5,
Okay,
5
that makes
for
it better.
6. Yeah. So he just had the nut draw of like the correct invasion land go, the correct invasion land go, untap Crystal Vein, enlisted worm hit, Bloodbraid, fucking shardless, fucking restore balance, wipe everything you own, then resolve my 3 creatures, one of which has haste, and beat the shit out of you. Then game 3, I E-tutored for an enlightened for an Ether Swarm Cannon, and his whole deck turned into a giant pile of shit.
So after I finished beating this guy 2-0, he said, "Well, do you want to play a couple more games just for fun?" I said, "Do you want to play your Legacy deck against my Modern deck?" And he was like, "Oh, okay, I guess that'll be fine." I'll be like, "How about I go first since I'm playing Modern?" He's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine." I go, Island Serum Visions go. He plays one of the weird lands. I go Scalding Tarn pass. He plays another weird land. End of turn, I fetch for a red-blue shock. Comes in tapped. Untap, draw my card for the turn, play an island, play Blood Moon. He goes, he looks at it and he goes, "Yeah, so I guess game 2.
That deck is fucking hilarious. Also, Chalice on 0, a problem for that deck.
Well, the other thing that's funny about this deck, the entire thing is super cheap. Like, a guy at the store just offered to give me almost the entire thing because he wanted to see me play it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Bloodbraid Elf is your high man in there. I don't know, what's a Chromanticore worth? I don't keep up with Standard.
It can't be much.
Yeah.
It's the entire deck is worth like less than 1 dual land, like less than 1 plateau.
Right.
Do people take decks like that to like Star City Games tournaments, or is it just like local meta?
Oh, I
People
mean,
probably
I fucking
do.
played against a Kark's Thumb deck at a GP. I mean, people spend. Sam was there. I have pictures. I mean, people will spend $40 to $50 to just take a pet deck and get absolutely fucking ruined. I mean, they're
And
the
that's
reason
the-
you're able to play in GPs. They're the jobbers that the whole money pyramid relies on. You know.
Well, and that's the like we talked about a couple episodes ago. That's why buys are so important, because a deck like that will just randomly like, oh, it turns out all your spells cost 4 or more, so my counterbalance does absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can keep a land on top and get restore balance out of the way, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, this happens all the time at Star Cities. There's just random decks, or somebody will just crawl out of the woods because they hear a GP is nearby and play Mole Worms, Nether Void, Ice Storm deck that they've had for 15, 20 years. It happens a lot in the U.S. Yeah. Yeah. There are many pockets of people without the internet in the woods that just come out and go to these things. So,
Guys, I just got a message from you might not know him, Trucus, Marcus Ewald, who top 8'd the Bazaar of Moxen with Mercus, and he just sent me a message, and it's only like a link to a screenshot of Magic Online, and his only comment is, "It happened." So Marcus is testing out Karanos in Miracles right now, and he just sent me a link, and it shows Karanos attacking, and it's it's so absurd, and a Better Skull equipped to Karanos. I have
my
no
God.
idea what matchup this is, but he's got like I can't even read it. What's it like? 11, 13? I don't know. Vigilance, Lifelink, Indestructible, and yeah, draws a card or shoots in the upkeep. This is insane. The game ended on turn 12. Trucus has won the game. Trucus has won the match. So shout out to Marcus for an awesome move here.
I do have one more, and I know Sean will appreciate this. There's a guy at our store who bounces around decks a lot, like I do, but he keeps trying to play Miracles decks. But and he's very frustrating to watch because I've been playing countertop for like 4 or 5 years. So like he does those things that a new countertop player doesn't do quickly. Like he takes like 10 or 15 seconds to top every time. And a guy playing against him played True Name Nemesis, and he goes ha and flips over a Wear Tear. And the guy played the True Name Nemesis was like, cool, so True Name resolved. No, it's 3. And I'm like 20 feet away, and I hear them call the judge, and he just holds up Wear Tear. And I can't even hear the conversation. He holds up Wear Tear, and I just like go on this rage about how, you know what, if you play Counterbalance and you don't know every single converted mana cost in your deck, throw that card away.
It's worth noting you do take 5 if you flip it with, or 3 if you flip it with Bob, right? So
Yes, because its
Yeah.
converted mana cost is 1 and 2, so you lose 1 and 2 life.
So whenever a card asks for the mana cost, it gets 2 answers, and in case of Warp, you just take damage twice now.
correct.
Or lose life, not take damage.
Yes, I had like I said, I've been playing almost twice a week for the last few weeks, so I've had all kinds of stupidity. I was on Cavern of Humans Painter Stone with like the full 4 recruiters, 4 trinket mages, like a red blue build, and I had a guy on Tin Fins, and so I get a painter down, and I grindstone him, and I'm thinking to myself, doesn't that deck play an Emrakul? And I kind of kick myself mentally, thinking, oh, you fucking idiot! I think that deck plays an Emrakul. And he says, so I get milled out, and I say, well. I mean, and I explain the interaction between Grindstone and Painter, so you continue milling cards, and they're always going to match, so yeah, I mean, essentially your whole deck will be milled, and your library will be in the graveyard. And he goes, okay, and he goes to the next game, and he flips his library over, and there's the Emrakul. So he declined to reshuffle his library and crush me. The next game, I get Painter out again, and I have a game-winning play, and he goes, I just needed another blue card. And his hand has like Force and Land in it. Yeah, yep.
Well, you know, the other thing that's funny about that is that he conceded and then chose to show you his deck.
Yeah.
Because if you concede, you do not have to show your deck.
He just put it together. The same guy didn't know what Fairy Macabre did, and was playing a reanimation strategy. Didn't bring in Pithing Needles versus Cavern of Artificers and whatnot. I had the luxury or the pleasure of slaughter gamesing a High Tide player a few weeks ago. That was fucking awesome. And he hadn't put a High Tide in his wish board, so that deck performs poorly when it has no High Tide. Low Tide is not a strategy.
The lowest of tides.
So, do you just auto-concede when they take away your high tides?
He kept playing and mumbling about some way he could win, and I didn't quite know what that was going to be, but anyway, I don't know. It's funny, though, when you slaughter game somebody and their hand is like Force, Flusterstorm. It's just very gratifying.
I mean, in theory, he could like still win by chaining untap effects and time spirals, and then going for like Cunning Wish, Brain Freeze.
Yeah.
Time spiral, some more untap effects, get another Brain Freeze, but yeah.
Excellent. A couple weeks prior to that, I was playing a bug deck that had most of the good cards that a bug deck would have, but it also had 2 Mystic Snakes and a Notion Thief. And it's worth noting that against High Tide, Mystic Snake is a fucking fisting. Because all of their counters, besides Force, are like, soft counters, Flusterstorms, etc. So he time spirals or does his winning play with like double Flusterstorm backup, and I just simply Mystic Snake him.
What the fuck is going on? Why are you playing Mystic Snake in Legacy?
Because he's trolling the people at his store.
Yeah, it's a $5 local, so I've got this bug shell with all the... Oh, it was a bug shell with, like, deeds and other things. So, Mystic Snake A is, in the mid-game, is a 4-mana thing, doesn't die to deed or abrupt decay. And it's pretty much a hard counter, like, nobody can deal with it. You can't spell pierce it, you can't Flusterstorm it.
I mean, I'm a big fan of Mystic Snake in, like, casual or wherever, because it's so mystic, but... Legacy...
If I'm going to 2 locals a week, for me to bring some fucking deck off some 75 from the latest Star City, I mean, I'm just going to be bored to tears flipping Delvers. So I try to throw at least half a dozen cards in decks that are at least interesting and are way better in corner cases. So in that case, Mystic Snake was superior. So was Notion Thief, also against High Tide. It's worth noting that card.
Notion Thief, that card is awesome. I really like that card.
It is a beat.
I mean, it should maybe even see a slightly more play, because if Shardless Bug becomes bigger, maybe you want to play Notion Thief because it doesn't die to Abrupt Decay, and if you get that in response to, like, let's say, Ancestral Visions, the deck has no way to actually remove it. So, in a mirror match.
Yeah,
and
it's a beating. It's a beating against Brainstorm, Ancestral Visions, a Resolved Jace. It's just a beating.
Yeah. It's also interesting, we recently had a tournament in Munich, and one of the guys had Notion Thief, but I feel he wasn't quite aware of how potent the card is, because he had Notion Thief in play, and then he played Vendilion Click, and targeted himself, because he really wanted to draw a card. And I was looking at it, and I was like, so why didn't you just target the opponent? No, I want to draw... Yeah, you would draw the card? And, I mean, I'm not the kind of guy who makes fun of these people to make them feel bad, but I really like telling people, like showing them new ways to play the game, and then the moment you see it in their face that they are like, oh, I mean, that's awesome to put people like on a new level and see them make better plays. That's, I don't know. I used to be a football coach, so I kind of like educating people on things that they are doing wrong.
Well, I don't understand football, so
You have to understand, the World Cup is starting next week.
I don't, because
We are actually playing.
I'm an
We are
American.
playing the Americans in the group stages.
Well, I'm an American of Irish and Spanish descent, so America sucks at soccer, and we're basically apathetic to it. I imagine that the Irish team is too drunk to travel to Brazil and actually win. All right, I guess that about wraps this up. Sam, you want to?
Feedback is always appreciated. Email us at everydayeternalcast@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/everydayeternalpodcast, or follow us on Twitter at eternalmtg.